The Ninja Turtles were a big deal back in the 1980s, and they were everywhere. Cartoons, movies, action figures, video games, but rarely does anyone talk about the comics, and this is where it all started. In fact, the cartoon was based off the comic book, so without the comic, there would have been no cartoon. Now after releasing my Nintendo review on all three Ninja Turtle games, a lot of people were asking why the Turtles were wearing the same colored bandanas on the cover of the first game. And it's probably because the cover was modeled after the comic book version of the Turtles, rather than the cartoon. In the comics, they all wore the same red colored bandana, and they only ended up changing the colors for the cartoon so that kids could tell them apart. Now, I was never a reader of the original Turtle comics because I was much too young for those. Instead, I ended up collecting the ones released by Archie Comics, which was intended for younger audiences, and based off the cartoon show. One really cool thing that they did was they broke away from the cartoon show, and the writers decided to go off into their own direction with the storyline, and it turned out to be the best thing they could have ever done. At the time, the Ninja Turtle action figures line became very popular, and they were cranking out tons of new characters and figures left and right. They were making so many that they were producing many random figures that hadn't even shown up in the cartoon yet. But the writers at Archie Comics saw this as an opportunity and seized it. They then performed a brilliant move by taking these obscure figures and making storylines around them. They made a whole issue about Rayman, Wingnut and Screwloose. They even took Leatherhead and gave him a backstory different from that on the cartoon show. The comics really came into their own, and what ended up happening was an epic storyline that would span over 25 issues in all. In fact, I think it ended up being more interesting than the cartoon itself. Now the story ends up being really unique, and during the first 5 issues of the story, the Turtles go all over the landscape, meeting new friends and foes, with the end result always leading back to a battle against Shredder. The next few issues then deals with a huge intergalactic battle that the Turtles must participate in, and after the battle ends, the Turtles are returned to Earth, but dropped off in South America, and it takes them another 7 issues just to find their way back home. It turns out to be a long and interesting saga, and once they return to the Big Apple, they learn that an alien presence has pretty much been taking over the city during their absence. And it's during this part of the story that all the plot threads come together to create one fascinating conclusion. Now keep in mind that readers of the comic only received a chapter of the story 1 month at a time, so you're pretty much left with a cliffhanger every month. So issue 25 ended by wrapping up all the storylines nicely, but after that, the writers decided to switch gears and went with storylines that took the comic in a really weird and different direction. They also ditched the long story arcs and kept the stories very short, and that really sucked. I'm not sure if they received a lot of complaints about kids not being able to follow the storyline or what, but after issue 25, the entire series just really went downhill, and it wasn't long after that before the entire comic book line was cancelled. I really enjoyed the Archie's take on the Turtles, and they really did a good job with the storyline, even though it's intended for younger audiences. And I think they should reprint this stuff with all the colors reworked, to give it a more modern look. Kind of like what they've been doing with the classic Uncle Scrooge comics that were drawn back around in the 1950s. Stuff looks damn good, eh? Well, the comics may be dead, but let's just hope that a second animated movie is on the way, because I thought the first one was pretty darn cool. Turtle power!